What happens when the richest man in Boston builds walls around his heart, not with bricks, but with policies? And what if the very rule he swore would keep his empire safe becomes the weapon that could tear it apart? This is the story of Weston Hale, a billionaire who declared no office romance, a man who thought discipline could replace grief and distance could keep danger away. And then June Adler walked in, a woman with steady hands and a name she fought to keep. She came not to break rules, but to rebuild a life. Yet the past has a way of finding its way back. Behind closed doors, whispers rise, a policy becomes a trap, and the truth about June's former life threatens not only her future, but the soul of the company itself. Can dignity survive when secrets are dragged into daylight? Can respect and love exist in the same room as power and in a city battered by storms? Who will stand when the harbor finally answers back? Stay with us as we begin this journey, one of truth, resilience, and love that refuses to hide. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the story that could change the way you see happily ever after. The wind off Boston Harbor carried a bite that felt sharper than the calendar suggested. It was only early October, yet the pre-dawn air had the steel of November. In the Seaport District, the brick alleys held dampness like a secret, and mist rose from the water as if the ocean were whispering back to the city. June Adler tugged her gray coat tighter as she crossed the cobblestones, sneakers clicking softly, breath puffing out in clouds. She had always been an early arriver, better to be inside before the crowd, before the chatter, before eyes could measure her too long. Her hand brushed the folded paper in her bag, the one she'd signed the day before in HR. A laminated page, rules bolded in black. The most insistent line underlined twice: no office romance. June's lips pressed into something between a smile and a grimace. Rules like that kept things tidy, kept emotions from leaking into work. But she knew the other truth, the one no policy admitted. Sometimes rules were walls, people built around themselves. Walls that trapped as much as they protected. The sodium streetlights buzzed above her as she stepped into the tower lobby. She paused, studying the sleek floor map etched in glass. 37 floors, elevators banked in silver, exits marked in faint red lines. She memorized them the way other new employees memorize names. Knowing her way out always mattered more than knowing her way in. By the time she reached the 32nd floor, her breath had steadied. The office lay hushed, all glass partitions and steel desks, the kind of place that looked polished enough to echo. She set her bag down and smoothed the papers HR had left. In his annex of glass overlooking the harbor, Weston Hale had been awake for hours. He rarely slept past 4. Coffee sat cooling beside him, forgotten after a single sip. His eyes moved across digital dashboards filled with cargo manifests, shipping routes, numbers that told stories only he could read. To anyone else, it was business as usual. Shipments stacked, barges docked, projections stable. To Weston, there was a small off-note, a figure nudged too fast, a timeline condensed. He marked it with a digital pen, a quiet frown furrowing at the edge of his mouth. At 44, Weston carried his discipline like armor. Hale Global had been built on order, on rules that carried his father's voice long after the man was gone. Weston had drafted the no-office romance rule himself. Years back, after watching too many complications seep into the walls, he told himself it was professionalism. In truth, it was protection. From mess, from vulnerability, from remembering what he had lost. The elevator's soft chime pulled him from his numbers. Through the glass, he saw a woman crossing the floor, slim, dark hair pinned neatly, jacket still carrying the outside chill. She moved like someone counting steps, deliberate but not timid. When June entered his office for the first time, she carried a small leather notebook and a sense of steadiness that seemed rehearsed. She asked no unnecessary questions, spoke in a voice low but clear. She laid out his day before he could prompt her. Meetings in order, notes marked, Tea set precisely at his preferred temperature, no sugar. A twist of lemon. Weston lifted the cup, inhaled the steam. For years. His mornings had been mechanical. This one had a pause, a space where he noticed not efficiency, but presence. Her eyes were storm gray, not beautiful in any practice sense, but anchoring. He reminded himself she was staff, that was all. Yet his hand lingered on the cup a moment longer than it should have. Around them, the culture of the floor bent to silence. Employees kept their distances, the rule a shadow they all recognized. It made people careful, made them polite in a way that was almost brittle. Weston liked it that way. Or so he thought. At her desk, June opened her pocket notebook when no one was watching. Inside were lists that didn't belong to the office. Lists of habits she used to anchor herself when her nerves surged. Count to 6. Feel the edge of the table. Breathe. She had carried these lists through harder places than this. They steadied her when the tide of memory threatened to pull her under. Late morning brought a packet from Keystone Maritime, spread across her desk with its glossy cover. Weston had flagged it for her to organize. A potential merger that promised to expand routes but demanded unusual speed. She sorted the documents, eyes tracing names with the care of someone looking for patterns. One surname stopped her. The letters seemed to lift from the page, as if underlined by memory itself. Her throat tightened. She closed the file quickly, pressing the pages flat as though by doing so she could press down the past. She rose, carrying the folder into Weston's office, her steps steady, though her pulse was not. He thanked her with a nod, already turning the first page. To him, the issue was numbers, timing, risk. To her, it was something older, colder, a shadow she was not ready to name. By afternoon, the harbor fog had thickened, horns of distant ferries moaning through the mist. A weather alert pulsed on the news screen in the lobby, nor'easter tracking north. Expected landfall tomorrow night? The storm warning lifted something in June she had tried to keep buried. Old names rose with it, names she had not spoken aloud in years. She finished her tasks with calm hands, then slipped her notebook back into her pocket. Weston remained behind glass, marking lines on his dashboards, watching cargo shifts with the precision of a man who trusted data more than people. But even he glanced once toward the storm-dark horizon, as if sensing that something more than weather was on its way. The day ended without drama, no climax, no raised voices. Yet when June stepped out into the damp brick alley again, she felt the ache of tension low in her chest, not yet sharp, but undeniable. Rules were walls, walls could crack, and storms, both the ones on the radar and the ones in memory, always arrived sooner than you expected. Some rules promised dignity. They framed the office as a place of focus, not feeling. This one went further. It policed tenderness itself. June Adler adjusted the cuffs of her blouse as dawn light rose behind the harbor glass. She kept her smile small, sleeves rolled, her posture precise. She had learned early that excellence could shield a person. If she was faultless, she could be invisible in the safest way. Her first task each morning was order. She filtered noise from signal. She read Weston Hale's inbox, flagged only what mattered, built buffers between his back-to-back meetings so that he could pause long enough to breathe. She arranged calls with a sense of rhythm, like a musician placing rests between notes. The staff noticed, though they never said it aloud. Thank you came quietly, paired with polite nods, voices pitched to match the air of the place. Politeness, gratitude, a faint wariness that was the culture here. The frame no office romance policy hung on the wall of HR, but its shadow reached every hallway. People respected boundaries as if they were breakable glass. At night, Frank Doyle often saw her leave. He was 68, a security guard with joints that stiffened in the damp harbor air. From behind the monitors, he observed how June's eyes flicked to sightlines, how she always knew where the exits were. She never lingered on her phone when she walked out. Her shoulders stayed squared, her head slightly turned, always aware. Frank had been a Marine once. He recognized the look. Survivor, he thought. Weston himself kept his distance. He spoke to June only in clipped professionalism, every word measured, but distance could not blind him. He noticed things. How she warmed hand lotion in her palms before sliding it across a colleague's desk on a cold morning. How she remembered to leave a warm cup beside the intern who worked through lunch. Warm cup, warm hands. Small gestures of care tucked inside routines. Mara Collins saw it too. The communications chief was 46, sharp-eyed, and confident enough to bend rules when the truth demanded it. She shook June's hand the second day and held it a second longer than most would. The squeeze carried warmth and something unspoken, an offer of safety. Should June ever need it? June had nodded, surprised by the softness beneath Mara's polished exterior. By midweek, Mara's inbox carried something less soft. An anonymous message. Ask who June Adler used to be. That was all. No signature, no attachment, only the weight of suspicion pressed into 6 words. Mara stared at the screen, her thumb tapping lightly on the desk. Then she slid the message into a folder she would not delete. Not yet. In Weston's office, the Keystone Maritime proposal spread across his desk. The numbers gleamed, but his eyes snagged on the words. The PR section leaned heavily into sentiment heritage, trust, legacy, odd for a shipping merger, where steel and logistics usually ruled. He flagged it in the margins, his instinct bristling. Sentiment was smoke, and smoke usually meant something burning underneath. June brought in fresh tea, the lemon wedge sliced thin. She set it down without interrupting his thought. Weston gave the smallest nod. He knew better than to thank her every time, but the acknowledgement was there. Her competence was easy to respect. What unsettled him was the pulse of attention he gave her beyond competence. By late afternoon, the office held its usual hush, but Mara sat in her glass-walled corner, eyes on the line of June's shoulders as the secretary moved through tasks. The anonymous tip still clung to her mind. Not about Weston, about June. Someone was probing, someone who wanted a past dragged into daylight. Mara didn't like it. She closed her laptop and walked the long way out, pausing by June's desk to offer a smile. "Don't stay too late," she said. June returned the smile, small, polite, nothing revealing. Outside, the forecast had shifted. The nor'easter had picked up speed, charts on the lobby screen now painted in crimson swirls. HR sent a building-wide memo that evening, a reminder of the no-office romance policy, citing recent reminders of its importance. The timing made people glance at one another. Who had been reminded, no one said aloud. June folded her coat tighter when she stepped into the night. Rules, weather, rumors, all of it pressing, all of it manageable for now. She touched the notebook in her pocket, as if reassurance lived inside its worn pages. But storms, whether in the sky or in whispered messages, rarely stayed outside for long. Storms outside and deadlines inside move the same way fast, sideways, and colder than anyone expects. By Tuesday morning, the nor'easter had grown from a rumor to a plotted swirl on every forecast screen. The harbor bristled with whitecaps, ferries cutting back their runs, seagulls flying lower than usual. In the boardroom, 30 stories up, the air carried its own storm. Weston Hale sat at the polished mahogany table, arms folded as the board chair. Eldon Pierce extolled Keystone Maritime's momentum. Eldon was 72, his voice gravel wrapped in velvet, the kind of tone that sounded like wisdom even when it pushed impatience. "Speed is advantage," Eldon said, tapping the file with a thick finger. "We must ride this tide before it ebbs." Weston leaned back, jaw set. Compressed schedules mean mistakes. Mistakes at sea aren't lost. Memos, their lives, cargo, insurance claims, litigation. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He would not be rushed, not by the weather outside or the pressure inside. When the meeting ended, he left without lingering. His distance was his habit, his shield. But as he passed rows of staff bending over keyboards, he caught flickers of glances, respect mixed with a trace of wariness. His rules, his walls, kept him untouchable. They also kept him alone, on the operations floor, June Adler moved through the storm drill checklist with quiet authority. Flashlights checked, backup batteries stocked. Floor marshals briefed on evacuation routes. She spoke in even tones, steadying those around her. People noticed calm more than they admitted. Frank Doyle, watching from the lobby monitors, saw how staff leaned toward June when she spoke. Her presence reminded him of field sergeants he had trusted long ago, people who carried steadiness in their bones. When she returned to her desk, June opened her notebook and drew lines across a blank page. Not numbers this time, but an outline, a training track for administrative staff, designed for women starting over after hard chapters. Workshops on filing systems, scheduling software, professional poise. She imagined offering what she had pieced together alone, a way to restart without shame. She closed the notebook quickly when footsteps approached. Weston handed her a stack of vendor sheets. "Sort by beneficial owner," he said. His voice was as clipped as ever, but his eyes lingered a fraction longer than usual. She began sifting, scanning lines of names, logistics, consulting, procurement. Then she froze. A shell company buried 2 pages in, with Derek Sloan listed as beneficial owner. The letters carved ice through her spine. Her pulse spiked, but her hands did not falter. She marked the page and slid it back into the pile, passing the sheets toward Weston with the same calm she had used when briefing floor marshals. "Keep moving," she told herself. "Always keep moving." Weston studied the sheets, circling the Sloan entry with his pen. His brows narrowed, though he did not look up. Odd to find a media consultant linked to maritime logistics. He muttered. He made a note for follow-up, unaware of the way June's breath had caught. In her glass office, Mara Collins had begun her own digging. She compiled a folder on Derek Sloan past campaigns, press tactics, the fingerprints he left behind, and headlines. Mara had a nose for spin, and she knew when someone's influence seeped unseen. By evening, the storm forecast grew sharper. The nor'easter was now 3 states away, pushing north with speed. HR circulated another policy memo, citing recent reminders. Staff read it, sighed, and deleted it. Downstairs, Frank called Weston's extension. "We had a group asking about basement access," Frank reported. Said they were maintenance, but their questions were too pointed. I sent them on their way, but it didn't sit right. Weston paused, phone against his ear, eyes shifting to the dark windows where rain had begun to speckle the glass. Outside storms, inside storms, both moving closer. And for the first time, June knew more about the threat than Weston did. Some lighthouses warned ships, others warned the heart. June Adler had learned to read both without moving her lips. The office annex sat quiet in late evening. The harbor outside was restless, red beacons pulsing against black water. Each sweep of light fell across Weston Hale's glass walls, painting his desk in fleeting crimson. He didn't look up. He never did on this date. His calendar showed the reminder he had set years ago and never deleted his father's death anniversary. He ignored it the way he always ignored it, by working longer, leaning harder into numbers, into screens, into anything that would keep memory sealed away. June noticed. She didn't speak of it, didn't cross into sympathy. Instead, she shifted quietly through schedules, moving one meeting here, canceling another there. She cleared a stretch of afternoon the next day, not with explanation, not with suggestion, just space. A silent opening, so, if he wished, he could walk the pier without the weight of stacked obligations. Competence was its own kind of comfort, she believed. Mara Collins stopped by before heading out. She lowered her voice, leaning against the glass wall of June's desk. "These Keystone press packets, they don't read like mergers. They read like campaigns. The language feels personal." June nodded, lips pressed tight. She tucked the words away. Another piece in the puzzle that seemed to grow sharper by the day, but her body betrayed her. A hum began low in her chest, the old sensation of pressure points she had once endured. She grounded herself the way she had practiced. She labeled what was in front of her, naming each anchor in her mind: desk, window, harbor, safe. She wrote the words in the margin of her notebook, small, discreet. Then she drew a line under them, as if closing a door. Weston's email chimed. A request slid in, routed not through HR but from a Keystone intermediary. It was a background check request not on him, not on any board member, but on June Adler. The phrasing was clinical, dressed as diligence, but the intent was unmistakable. A line crossed. Weston's jaw tightened. Cross-company diligence on one of his employees? Not acceptable. He picked up the phone, his voice like steel drawn from a sheath. He ordered HR to lock personnel files, to restrict access to internal servers, to treat June's record as confidential. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. The command carried weight. For years, he had kept his distance. Now, someone else's intrusion made the boundary visible, and it was his to guard. June heard the sound of elevator doors sliding open down the hall. She knew instinctively that the weather had shifted. Outside, the nor'easter inched closer up the coast. Inside, something else was building pressure that no policy could contain. At 3:12 a.m., the building sighed. A low groan moved through the steel bones, followed by a stutter in the current. The lights went thin, stretching shadows long across the seaport tower's glass walls. Screens dimmed, elevators froze. Everyone reached for phones. June Adler reached for breath. Outside, the nor'easter lashed the city, 38 degrees, rain slanting sideways under gusts near 50 miles an hour. Windows rattled, wind moaned through the vents. The emergency generators kicked on with a slow hum, filling the hallways with a low vibration that seemed to run beneath the skin. June did what came natural. She stepped into motion. She guided executives half awake in their suits toward the safe zones, using calm words instead of sharp orders. She checked on the custodial crew by name, remembering each face, each family story shared over late-night coffee breaks. She pulled protein bars from her drawer, handing them out with a small smile. Simple things mattered when nerves frayed. In the copy room, alone, she paused. Her chest felt tight, the old echo of panic pressing at her ribs. She closed her eyes. She breathed in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She let the air go, slow as tide retreating. Again, she labeled the things around her in silence. The hum of the machine, the chill of the tile beneath her shoes, the faint lemon of cleaner, safe, safe. Her pulse slowed, her body returned to the present. Weston Hale, making rounds with the floor captains, saw her from the doorway. He said nothing. He only noted the calm that seemed to radiate from her as she rejoined the group, voice steady, steps even. He respected it, perhaps more than any report or projection. He did not intrude. He knew better than to disturb the source of steadiness when storms were high. Down in the security room, Frank Doyle leaned over the monitors, his eyes narrowing. He texted Mara Collins, short and sharp. Camera 12. Eldon with a maintenance consultant in basement. Mara's reply came fast. Consultant who Frank zoomed. The cap shaded most of the man's face, but the smile gave him away. Derek Sloan. Mara's throat went dry. Eldon Pierce, chair of the board, was walking Derek through restricted corridors while a storm battered the city. No explanation, no record, no permission. On the 12th floor. June froze for reasons that had nothing to do with weather. She had heard it a laugh carrying faintly through concrete and ductwork. A laugh she remembered from years before. One she had buried under layers of silence. Derek's. Her body wanted to fold, to run, to hide. Instead, she steadied her stance. Feet on the ground, shoulders squared, present. She told herself again and again, safe. She stayed where she was. She kept working. Around her, the storm slammed windows, shook doors, and howled down alleyways. But the storm outside was not the problem. The problem was the knock on the door that had not yet come. You can change a name on paper. The body remembers anyway. Keystone unveiled their new strategic advisor in a press release polished to a sheen. Derek Sloan's photo glowed on screens across the office. His smile was museum quality, practiced for cameras, too smooth to belong to a real man. But his eyes told the truth. Sharp, scanning, hungry. Eldon Pierce wasted no time. At the next board call, he praised Derek as indispensable. He used words like innovative, visionary, necessary. Within hours, the HR department reprinted the no office romance posters and plastered them in new corners of the building. Performative zeal. The rule waved like a flag, as if paper could protect people from men like Derek. Weston Hale's instincts bristled. He watched Derek closely. The questions Derek asked in meetings weren't about roots, containers, or margins. They were about people, which managers had influence, which assistants held access, which employees lingered after hours. Weston noted each one, his pen scratching in the margin, a quiet counter to Eldon's praise. Mara Collins saw Derek's hand in emails trickling into the comms inbox. Subject lines crafted like hooks, phrases designed to stir suspicion, to plant seeds. What do you know about her? Who was she before Boston gossip dressed as inquiry? Mara dragged them into a folder marked with Derek's name. She recognized smear tactics when she saw them. June felt the air grow heavier each day. Derek's name spread through the office. She avoided his gaze in meetings, avoided floors he walked. But avoidance wasn't enough. In a stairwell one late afternoon, she stopped Mara with a hand on her sleeve. The hum of the building filled the silence. June's voice was low, but steady. My name wasn't always June Adler. She paused. I was Lydia Whitaker, Colorado Springs. I left when I was 30. I left a man who called harm love. He wasn't going to stop. I changed my name. I built a new life. It was legal. It was mine. Mara stood still, her face softening. She didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't offer pity. She just nodded, the weight of the confession settling like stones between them. Derek, Mara asked gently. June's jaw tightened. Yes, he was the man I left, and he will not stop until he makes me pay for it. Mara breathed out slowly. She placed her hand over June's for a moment, not as comfort, but as acknowledgement. Then, we don't let him write this story. You do. Meanwhile, Frank Doyle forwarded alerts from the server logs, door taps, unauthorized attempts. The map of access pings traced a breadcrumb trail near restricted rooms. Someone was searching, pressing at the edges of the system, hunting for something they weren't supposed to see. Weston circled the alerts, his patience thinning, patterns were forming, and every one of them led back to Derek Sloan. For June. The stairwell moment lingered after she returned to her desk. Her pulse stayed high, but her shoulders had lowered. For the first time in years, she had spoken her truth out loud. Lydia Whitaker was not buried anymore. She lived in the same body as June Adler, and sooner than later, the world would know. Policies can protect. In the wrong hands, they punish the wrong people first. Derek Sloan knew how to twist rules until they cut. In the next board strategy session, he leaned back in his chair, his smile just shy of smug. He spoke with measured concern, each word dipped in false gravity. I worry about Ms. Adler, he said. Her background appears complicated, and I've noticed Hale is less strict about his own policy when it comes to her. That could become a liability. Eldon Pierce folded his hands, brow furrowed as if carrying the burden of ethics. He nodded gravely, letting the insinuation hang. No direct accusation, no proof, just suggestion heavy enough to sink reputations. By mid-afternoon, HR had called a private meeting. They framed it as procedure, nothing personal. They proposed placing June on leave for optics, to protect the company from rumors. Weston Hale's jaw tightened, his voice cut sharper than usual. Leadership shields its people. It doesn't throw them under a bus for appearances. The room went still. He rarely raised his tone, but this was a line he would not allow them to cross. That evening, June sat at her desk long after others had left. She drafted a resignation letter, not from guilt, but from a wish to remove the heat pressing down on Weston. She folded it neatly, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in the center of her desk. When Mara Collins stopped by and saw it, she shook her head, picked up the letter, and tore it cleanly in half. The sound was sharp, final. "Secrecy never beats rumor," she said. "The truth will. You've built a life out of truth. Don't hand it over now." June swallowed hard, her pulse unsteady. Still, something in Mara's certainty gave her strength. Meanwhile, Weston confronted Eldon directly. He laid down the evidence Keystone had bypassed HR, had demanded files they had no right to. Weston's voice was controlled, but the steel underneath left no room for argument. Eldon deflected, but the silence in the boardroom told Weston the warning had landed. Frank Doyle noticed movements others might have missed. Men he didn't recognize, moving through stairwells with too much attention to detail. They weren't learning routes for safety. They were mapping them for speed, escape paths, quick exits. His gut told him this wasn't maintenance. It was planning. By Friday, the rumor mill had erupted. A grainy photo surfaced online, Lydia Whitaker, blurred but recognizable, stapled digitally beside June Adler's corporate headshot. The caption whispered louder than any headline. "Who is she really?" June's hands shook as she stared at the image. Two lives, side by side, connected by pixels. The name she had buried was alive again, and now it was being used as a weapon. The very policy that had promised protection was now the cudgel swung against her. She closed her eyes. For years, she had let others define her story. Not this time. She squared her shoulders. If a story was going to be told, it would be told by her. You cannot shame a person who has already chosen honesty. You can only stand in the light with them or look away. By mid-morning, the headlines had spread across every screen. Weston Hale, accused of hypocrisy. June Adler, accused of deception. Blogs and business feeds latched onto the no office romance policy as if it were scripture, twisting it into outrage. By lunch, the phrase trended across social media, stripped of context, repeated without nuance. Inside the tower, the air felt brittle. Conversations hushed when June walked through the hall. Colleagues offered half smiles that ended too quickly, eyes sliding away. The building, always cold with glass and steel, felt colder than the harbor itself. Eldon Pierce called a meeting and announced June's suspension pending review. His tone was regretful, his hands folded as if weighed down by duty. No accusations, only procedure. Yet the message was clear. June was the liability. She returned to her desk quietly, her hands resting flat on the wood. For a long moment, she stared at the blank page of her notebook. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote her statement in plain words. "My name was Lydia Whitaker. I changed it to June Adler after leaving a fiancé who caused harm and called it love. I built a new life, legally, carefully, with dignity. I have done the work. I have earned my place. I will not be reduced to a file or a rumor." She set down the pen. She read the words once. They were not eloquent. They were not dressed for spin. They were true. That was enough. When Weston read the suspension order, something in him cracked. He had drafted rules to prevent chaos, to preserve dignity. Now the same rules had been sharpened into weapons. He called Mara into his office. His voice was low, deliberate. "We hold a town hall, internal first, then local press. Doors open." Mara's eyes flickered with approval. She began drafting the frame, not gossip, not scandal, but governance, ethics, the misuse of policy as cover for greed. She knew how to shift the lens. Meanwhile, Frank Doyle coordinated with IT. Together. They finished the off-site backups, storing copies 2 miles inland. The nor'easter's bands circled back, winds rattling the windows again. But Frank's gut told him the storm inside mattered more than the one outside. Financial Counsel delivered the final piece. Derek Sloan's shell companies had been quietly accumulating shares of HML. The pattern was clear market manipulation, staged to push panic, drive stock down, then buy cheap, greed wearing the mask of concern. By late afternoon, the smear began to backfire. The more the rumors spread, the more scrutiny turned to Derek's trail of companies. The story shifted. Headlines that once screamed scandal now whispered suspicion of fraud. The real story was not June's name. It was money. It was power. It was theft. At 4:30, June stood in the quiet of the copy room, holding her statement. The air smelled faintly of toner, the hum of the storm against the windows steady in the background. She breathed once, twice. Town hall at 5. She would stand at the lectern, not to beg, not to defend, but to be clear. When a community decides what it believes about you, the wind changes. You feel it in your ribs. By 5 o'clock, the cafeteria had been rearranged into rows of chairs facing a lectern. The storm outside had quieted for a while, rain sliding steady down the glass. Wind softened but still humming at the edges. Inside, the storm was about to break open. June Adler stood at the lectern, her notebook in her hands. She looked out at the faces of staff she had worked beside, for months their curiosity, their uncertainty, their cautious trust. She spoke plainly. My name was Lydia Whitaker. I left that life behind to survive. I changed my name to June Adler. I did the work. I earned my place. My worth is not measured by rumors or by paperwork, but by the life I've built here. Every day I've shown up. No spectacle, no trembling voice, just competence over confession, steadiness over shame. Staff leaned forward, some nodding. It was the steadiness they already knew, now spoken aloud. Then Weston Hale stepped up beside her. He didn't touch her arm, didn't claim her space, but his presence was deliberate. He turned on the projector, slides simple, clean, shell companies, nominee accounts, vote rigging, no adjectives, no loaded phrases, only facts. Each slide stripped away Keystone smoke, revealing the money trail beneath. The room murmured. For once, the numbers were not abstract. They were a mirror showing greed in its plainest form. The doors slammed open. Derek Sloan strode in. Rain still glistening on his coat, his voice cut sharp, full of insinuations. You expect us to believe this secretary. You expect us to ignore what she's hiding. June looked at him, calm as stone. I refuse your bait. I refuse to be framed as a victim when I am not. My boundaries are mine to name, not yours. The silence that followed was heavy, but it leaned her way. Staff turned, not toward Derek, but toward her. Night fell as the town hall dispersed. Upstairs, alarms blared, a server breach attempt. Security lights strobed, but Frank Doyle had prepared. Backups were off-site. Logs were monitored. The breach that might have unraveled the company became paperwork and handcuffs. Arrests were made before the wind outside rose again. Phones buzzed as filings moved through federal channels. The SEC logged complaints, subpoenas issued. Eldon Pierce's undisclosed ties to Derek's firms came to light. His name began to unravel alongside Derek's. The building exhaled for the first time in weeks. The storm outside softened, mist replacing sheets of rain. Inside, the storm clarified. Truth stood where rumor had tried to sit. By midnight, the agenda for morning was clear. An emergency board session at 7 a.m. 2 lines only, CEO removal or merger termination. The harbor answered in its own way. The wind shifted. The tide leaned in. Power rarely apologizes. Accountability feels like winter sun, low, thin, still healing. At 7 sharp, the board gathered. Heavy coats draped across chairbacks. Umbrellas leaned in corners, the smell of damp wool still clinging from the storm. Council sat along one wall, quiet but present. Weston Hale entered with his notes under one arm. His expression was level, not triumphant, not broken steady. Eldon Pierce sat stiffly at the end of the long mahogany table. His hands, always restless, tapped once against a folder before folding tightly together. The disclosures were read aloud. His financial ties to Derek Sloan's companies, his private communications, his quiet pressure for the merger, all now official record. When the vote came, it was not close. Eldon was removed as chair. He stared straight ahead as the tally was announced, the faintest flush rising along his collar. No words, just the scrape of his chair as he stood, leaving the room smaller but somehow lighter. The second motion followed. The merger with Keystone Maritime was terminated. The room exhaled in a long, tired breath. Then came the third motion, a vote of confidence in Weston's leadership, contingent on culture reform. This time, the tally carried weight of a different kind. He was kept in place, but with responsibility tied to change. Outside, the wind shifted east. The nor'easter cleared the city as if rinsing stone with salt water. News traveled fast. Derek Sloan had been taken into custody, charged with obstruction, manipulation, and securities fraud. The investigations widened in circles, touching every company he had used as cover. Staff whispered in break rooms, relief mixed with fatigue. They had lived under his shadow without knowing it. Now the light reached further. Later that day, Weston stood in the atrium. Staff gathered on the steps, along railings, in doorways. He spoke without flourish. The policy that forbade relationships was written to protect this company. But it was used to silence, to shame, to turn private lives into weapons. It ends today. He lifted a new document. In its place, we adopt a respect and ethics code. It calls for disclosure of relationships where power is imbalanced. It prohibits retaliation. It establishes training so dignity is not a rumor but a practice. This building will protect people, not just profits. The words did not roar. They landed with quiet certainty, like nails driven into fresh wood. June listened from a step above the floor, her hands folded around the notebook that had become her anchor. For once, she felt the rule lift off her shoulders like a coat removed at the end of a long winter. Around her, staff exchanged glances, some cautious, some hopeful. A few clapped softly, then more joined. The sound filled the atrium, not like thunder, but like steady rain after drought. By afternoon, a public statement was released. Dignity and safety were named not as slogans, but as commitments. Survivor privacy was written in bold, an acknowledgement that silence should not be exploited, but respected. At dusk, the harbor turned mirror still. After days of storm, the water reflected city lights without ripple. Employees stepped outside, scarves pulled close, breathing in air that no longer carried the taste of rain. Conversations were quieter, more personal. A sense of endurance replaced tension. June lingered by the glass doors, watching her breath cloud and fade. She felt both smaller and stronger than she had in years. She was not the rule breaker the rumors claimed. She was simply here, working, steady, and still standing. Later that evening, her phone buzzed, an email notification. She opened it and read twice before believing. Dear Ms. Adler, we are pleased to inform you that your application for seed funding has been approved. We believe in your vision for an admin training pilot and look forward to supporting its launch. Her knees softened. She found a bench in the lobby and sat down, pressing the phone to her chest. The grant was not just money. It was permission. It was the world saying, yes, your idea matters. For the first time in days, she smiled without restraint. The building had shifted posture. The city had quieted. The tide had turned. Some futures arrive without ceremony. A folding table set against a cream wall. A dry erase marker squeaking on its surface. 10 women arriving on time, coats damp from drizzle, eyes sharp with readiness. That was the opening morning of Harbor Hands Initiative. The room sat 2 miles inland, carved out of an old community center. The paint still smelled new, though the floor carried faint scuffs from decades of basketball games and scout meetings. June had chosen it for its location close enough to the harbor to keep its roots, far enough to feel like neutral ground. She stood at the front, a stack of handouts beside her. Resume templates, calendar basics, vendor contact sheets, scripts for saying no politely but firmly. tools she had once longed for when she was rebuilding her own life. She passed them out with a steady smile. "We'll start simple," she said, "and we'll practice until it feels like muscle." The women nodded, some chewing pens already, some writing their names carefully at the top of the page. Hale Maritime and Logistics sponsored the program with paid internships. Older admin staff, women who had managed schedules for decades, came to mentor. They carried their experience not as weight, but as lanterns. At the coffee break, paper cups in hand, they shared stories about misdialed numbers that turned into new contracts, about learning to type on manual machines, about surviving office politics that no policy ever covered. Laughter drifted into the hall, warm against the echo of the building. June listened from the doorway, her chest lifting with something close to wonder. She had built this from notebooks and late-night calculations. Now it was breathing, alive with voices that believed again in tomorrow. Weston found his own kind of practice. He began leaving the office at 6:15 p.m. sharp, no excuses, no lingering just to look busy. He walked the harbor walk with his coat open and his phone in his pocket, untouched. Sometimes he carried nothing but his own hands, learning the weight of them when they weren't clenching around numbers. The city looked different at that hour. Joggers, dog walkers, parents tugging children toward the train. He fit nowhere and everywhere at once. One evening, he stopped at a railing and watched a tugboat thread between freighters. He realized he wasn't thinking about balance sheets or schedules. He was simply watching water move. That felt like a kind of wealth he had never counted. In the fall, Mara Collins accepted an ethics award from a regional press association. Her speech lasted less than 10 minutes. She credited teams, custodians, the night security staff by name. "Ethics is not grand," she said. "It is remembering who emptied the trash so the meeting could start fresh." The applause rose like a tide, steady and certain. Frank Doyle, officially retired, consulted for harbor hands. He walked the perimeter with June, noting doors that needed new locks, cameras that should be angled differently. Walkout plans for the cohort. "Not fear," he told her, "just readiness. A good door doesn't mean you expect trouble. It means you value what's inside." She nodded, taking notes on a yellow pad, grateful for the grounding of his calm. Her desk in the office was a piece of reclaimed wood from a retired pier. Its surface was scarred with deep grooves and faint burns where ropes had once seared through. She ran her hand across it often, feeling history instead of shame. It anchored her. She wanted every woman who sat across from her to know that scars could carry strength, not just memory. The weeks turned into months. Cohorts came and went, each leaving behind a pinboard of photos, women smiling with new ID badges, vendor contracts, first pay stubs. The board became the heartbeat of the room. There was no single climax, no burst of triumph. Only the gentle rise of ordinary hope. It looked like someone arriving early with muffins to share. It looked like another woman reading her first email aloud without trembling. It looked like quiet applause in a room where no one was performing, only practicing. For June, hope became the rhythm of daily tasks, refilling the coffee urn, adjusting chairs, checking attendance sheets. It was not glamorous, it was real. One Thursday evening, she and Weston met at the edge of the harbor walk. The sky was streaked with rose and slate as the sun lowered behind cranes and rooftops. They stood without speaking for a while, hands brushing, then holding. "We don't have to hide," June said finally, her voice low but certain. "No," Weston agreed, his face softened, "and we don't have to make a spectacle either." They decided, together, to be seen in public, slowly, deliberately, without secrecy, without excess display, just themselves, walking by the water, known but not performed. The decision was not fireworks. It was steadier than that, like two lights set in a harbor, visible, guiding, enough. Happily ever after is a myth. Truthfully ever after is work, and it is beautiful. 2 years later, December air wrapped Boston in a clear chill, the harbor steady at 32 to 35 degrees. Lights stretched along the water like patient stars, reflections trembling against the black surface. The wind bit, but it carried no threat, only the bracing honesty of winter. Inside a refurbished wharf building, harbor hands held its winter gathering. What had started as a single folding table now lived in 3 New England towns within 90 miles. Cohorts graduated, then returned as mentors. Women stood at the front of rooms to teach resumes, to explain polite refusal scripts, to show new faces how to keep a calendar without fear. Some wore caps from community college ceremonies. Others brought photos of their first house keys, mortgages signed, lives steady. June walked the length of the hall with quiet satisfaction. On one wall hung a simple black frame. Inside was her very first notebook page, the flowchart she had drawn alone in a stairwell, the skeleton of a life rebuilt, ink faded, edges bent. She had almost thrown it away once. Now it hung as proof that ideas scribbled in fear could grow into shelter. At the same time, Weston's name appeared in a very different setting. Harvard Business Review published a profile on Hale Maritime's reforms. It detailed governance changes, ethics code enforcement, board accountability. But between the lines, the article read more like a thank you note not to Weston himself, but to the people who had stayed when rumors swirled, who had trusted steadiness over spectacle. Weston read it with the same reserved expression he brought to quarterly reports. But June caught the softened look in his eyes when he set the magazine down. Frank Doyle raised a mug of hot cider at the gathering, his voice still carrying the authority of years in uniform. "Here's to good doors, strong locks, and knowing who you let in," he said. Laughter answered him, warm and full. Mara Collins leaned against a railing nearby, her hair silvering at the temples, her grin sly. "I'm writing a book," she told June, "public relations with a spine." The women around her laughed, already asking for advance copies. Later, June and Weston moved through the crowd together, not as a spectacle, not as a headline, simply as presence, proof that safety, respect, and love could share one room without apology. They greeted graduates, thanked mentors, picked up stray paper cups, and blended into the rhythm of community. The climax was not sharp, it was soft, the crest of a wave that lasted. The harbor outside answered not with thunder, but with tides, steady, returning, faithful. Near the end of the evening, June and Weston stepped outside. The cold hit their cheeks, breath fogging into the air. They stood by the rail, side by side, coats drawn close. Behind them, laughter spilled through the doors, carrying warmth into the night. They did not speak of forever. They spoke of tomorrow, another honest day to choose, another tide to meet, another chance to live truthfully ever after. At its heart, this story is not only about business, power, or romance, it is about dignity. June's journey reminds us that survival is not shameful, and that starting over is not weakness, but courage. She teaches us that the names we carry, whether chosen or inherited, do not define our worth. What defines us are the steady acts of showing up, telling the truth, and building again even when storms return. Weston's transformation shows another truth. Rules cannot replace humanity. We can write policies and build walls, but safety only comes when people are treated with respect, not suspicion. Love and leadership are not opposites. In fact, the strongest leaders are those who choose compassion without sacrificing clarity. For us, whether in families, workplaces, or communities, the lesson is simple yet deep. Be honest about your past, but don't let it chain your future. Protect those around you, not with suspicion, but with trust and fairness. And when storms, literal or personal, knock at the door, remember that calm courage can turn panic into strength. We cannot always choose what comes against us, but we can always choose to live truthfully, and that choice itself is a kind of freedom. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with us and walking through this story together. Every view, every comment, and every moment you share means the world. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life, and we'd be honored to have you with us for the next one.